Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beyond Trauma for a very special, really tuned in episode. It always happens that I get these creative bursts with the podcast and I record a bunch, and then I kind of get a little, I don't know, like I'm not sure. I don't want to put anything out there for you all that isn't meaningful to me or like really valuable. So if I'm not feeling it, like I'm not going to just do an interview just to get something out there. So I was thinking of taking a little summer break, but then, oh no, then I was reconnected with a teacher of mine, Henry Fersko-Weiss. I took his Death Doula certification course, and many of you have asked me about it, what it is to be a Death Doula. Did I like my course? Am I doing it? And all those kinds of questions. So actually, this will be the answer to so many questions that many of you have been asking. We really get into a beautiful, very heartfelt, just like sober conversation, like very real, very powerful. Henry Fersko-Weiss is a licensed clinical social worker as well as a death doula. He has worked with hundreds of dying individuals and their loved ones as a hospice social worker, a volunteer coordinator, and manager. And as a doula, he's been by the bedside of many people as they have journeyed through the dying process. He's also maintained a private practice for 25 years, focused on helping people face death and grieve their losses. Henry tells his story in the podcast, but he was working in hospice and he saw a need for a different role. And he is the one that created the first End-of-Life Doula program in the US to serve people in the months before death and in the final days of life. He's an incredible person to learn from. He has a book, Caring for the Dying, The Doula Approach to a Meaningful Death. He, as you will see and feel in this interview, is just very connected to truth and just beautiful soul. So I look forward to hearing your takeaways and what you get from this conversation. And I'm sure there will be quite a lot. So, some of your thoughts, make sure to rate and review the podcast, to write a little message and let us know how it's helping you, and to share this with a loved one, and also to share this with someone who might want to go through the Death Doula training. As you'll hear in the conversation, I highly recommend this for anyone, including folks who don't even think that they might go on to be a Death Doula, just to go through the process of what dying might look like and to think about your death. And it really impacts the way you live. So here we go. There we go. Henry, thank you so much for jumping in and recording this podcast with me. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to it.
I don't know how I ended up in your course, actually, but something drew me to it, and I took your Death Doula course. And a lot of people ask me, what it is, what a Death Doula is, and a lot of people are very curious when they see that on my website and bio. So I'm very happy to have you on, to have you explain it, because I know you could do it much more eloquently than I can. So maybe we can just start with some basics of, what is a death doula? How did you become a death doula?
Okay. So I think the simple sort of description of a death doula is somebody who supports and guides a person who's dying and the people around that person who's caring for them or just being intimately involved with them, help them to go through this process of dying in a way that is gives them the ability to kind of deepen the meaning of that experience as well as make it as comfortable and as easy and I often use the word beautiful, and I know that surprises people sometimes, but I think the dying process can be incredibly beautiful. And I know I have seen some amazing, tender and loving moments between people, and real growth in
Mm.
people, even when they're dying.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess if we can face that, recognize that time, it could be an opportunity for some rapid growth.
Yeah.
I
You know, I,
wonder, yeah. Yeah, go
no,
on, please.
I was just going to say that I think in our culture, in our country in particular, there's a lot of avoidance of pain.
Yeah.
We think that pain is something that we have to run away from. But if we have the ability to and the encouragement to embrace our experience, to lean into some of the pain that is a natural part of the dying process. And I don't mean just physical pain, of course, but the psychological and emotional pain. Then amazing things can happen. But if we are intent on closing down the pain or running away from it or medicating it, um, so that it's not as present, then we shut down a lot of the other things that can happen in
Mm.
dying.
It's like if we close ourselves off to pain or protect ourselves too much from pain, you can't numb that without numbing the other side of experience.
Yeah. And it's not just about numbing, but I think that's a good point. But um, if we try to shut down the emotional and psychological pain that is obviously a part of dying, then we can't any longer have deep engagement between the people who are involved with the dying person,
Hmm.
because they become afraid to bring out the pain, to make the person who's dying suffer more, which is what they're afraid will happen. That they'll put the person into a state of despair, and the remaining time of their life will be filled with that despair and sadness, and that's not true, and it's certainly not necessary. But if we shut down or try to shut down the emotional and psychological suffering that's there, then we can't any longer be um, intimately and deeply engaged in a substantial way with each other.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, because it's a denial about what's going on. So I guess you're kind of living a little bit of a lie or on the surface if you're not acknowledging what's happening.
yeah, I think that word surface, it becomes superficial. The engagements, certainly, people try to make the person who's dying as comfortable as possible, and that can always go on. But if we don't talk about dying and we don't face it openly and honestly, then we exclude a tremendous amount of potential
Mm.
for exchange, for growth, even for transformation, and that's really a shame.
So does the death doula kind of help the person who is dying to help others interact with them in a more authentic way?
I think the having a death doula present helps the dying person as well as those around them to engage with each other more intimately, deeply, and meaningfully.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the major roles that the death doula or end of life doula has, is to open that door to a real engagement in this process with each other.
It seems like you teach folks how to do that, and you do that through some different strategies of some empathetic listening and um, some open questions, and also some like going through life themes. Can you share like some of
Hmm.
those main strategies
Sure.
you use?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think, and this is not true of every death doula. So just as when we talk about, for example, palliative care, it's not one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Some people do palliative care in one way, and others do it in a different way. And I think this is true of end of life or death doulas as well. That some of them do more, and some of them do less. But one of the things that I think is crucial is what you kind of indicated, this idea of life review, but a really deep dive into a person's life, a really structured, conscious um, journey into exploring who this person is, which we do often directly with the person who's dying. So it serves a couple of purposes. One, for the dying person, it naturally allows them to look back over their life, which I think is an organic psychic need when a person is dying. I think it's
Mm.
very natural for a person to look back over their life and try and assess it in some way. You know, did I live a good life? How was it? Did I do the things I wanted to do? Where did I miss things? Where did I fall down? I think those things come up automatically and naturally as a person faces the fact that their life is now limited. And so we serve that purpose of helping the person to do that kind of structured, deep life review. And that helps the person to really look back and come to some sense of completion about their life and see it as a whole and understand it in a way that may be deeper than they've ever thought about it.
Mm.
And that, I think, gives them the opportunity to have a better, not only understanding, but appreciation of who they are. And that leads, I think, into what we call legacy work or remembrance work that allows a dying person to leave behind or create something that their loved ones or the people around them can have to think of them, remember them, to engage with them even after they're gone. And for the loved ones around the person who's dying, it gives them a better way of really assessing who this person has been in their life, what has
Mm.
the impact been on them from living with this person for however long they have. And it gives them a chance to assess their engagement and to see more deeply who they are in relationship to this person. And I think that brings them both into a place of understanding and appreciating the person that they're losing, as well as themselves. You know, I think that's important to remember that whenever we look deeply into a person's life, we're looking into our own self as well, because we are so intertwined with the people we love, the people who are part of our intimate life.
Mm.
So that that life review and legacy work, I think, are critical to bringing a deeper meaning to the dying process.
Wow. Yeah, that's sounds really powerful.
Yeah.
Um, I'm wondering how that d- can you reflect on how going through that process helps for the people who are living after their loved one has passed? Um, do you think it helps with their grieving afterward?
Oh, absolutely. On a number of different levels, I think it's very beautiful to create some kind of legacy that captures the meaning of who this person has been, what they have learned in their life, the values that they have honored as they lived their life. Um, so after the person dies, whether it's in the form of a memory book or it's an audio or a video of the person with them talking about their life in a deep way, whether it's some kind of art project, we do things that we call scrolls,
Mm.
which might be on a large piece of paper or even a fabric of some kind that allows people to write, to paint, to sew something into it, to draw on it, a combination of all of that. Um, when the person is gone, that becomes a way for the people around them to re-engage with them in a deep way. And one of the things we know about grief is that there is a very natural continuing bond with the person who has died, that they live on inside us.
Mm.
The legacy allows them to also live on outside of the interior, you know, experience of a person who has died. They get to see it, to share it, to reflect on it. And over time, that can become a treasure that speaks to and gives voice to the dying person or the person who has died into the lives of the people who are left after them, even people who haven't yet been born.
I was
You know,
thinking that.
you and
Yeah.
I were talking about children and me grandchildren, and when my dad died in 2000, he was 90 at the time, and my kids weren't born. Well, my older son, no, excuse me, both of my kids were born, but they were very little,
Hmm.
and so they have very little memory of my dad in a direct way. But one of the things I did is I did an interview with my dad about 2 months before he was dying, and I knew and he knew he was dying. This is before I became a doula, and I was a hospice social worker though at the time. And I made a for 40 minutes we did an interview, and I asked him all kinds of questions, things that I had never asked him before, but I always thought I would ask him at some point, and
Hmm.
just kept, never taking the time to do it.
Yeah.
Uh, but that hearing my dad's voice, which my children could not possibly remember, they can see pictures of him and they may have some vague internal recollection of what he looked like, but they can't possibly have kept his voice. And now I have grandchildren who are very little, and they, of course, could never have known my dad, but they
Yeah.
can hear his voice. They can hear what he had to say about how he lived, what he did as a kid, how his childhood was, how he became a great tennis player, which he was. Things that get shared over generations. So my father's voice, literally and also figuratively, become a part of their lives.
Yeah.
And they then get to carry him in a way that they never could. And
Yeah.
so I think that's amazing and beautiful.
So do I. I mean, I was reflecting on not too long ago how more typically in a few generations, normally we're forgotten. The stories
Yeah.
are forgotten. Maybe there's like a vague one line about your
Yeah.
great great grandparent. That they boil down to one line of one thing they did to your mom. Like it's to have something deep like that, and that can get passed down is just really so beautiful.
Yeah. And it's not just, of course, I think it's profound to be able to hear the voice of somebody or to hear about them in some way. But for a person to be able to share the lessons they've learned in their life,
Yeah.
and the values that became important to them, the things that were the driving forces in their life, and to be able to share that with the hope and the intention that that becomes meaningful and
Hmm.
allows somebody to absorb it and make it part of their own life. I mean, that's amazing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the same way, right? This like it seems like every 3, 4 generations we have to learn the same lessons again. So,
Yeah,
to have some of those lessons passed down, and then also just how we tend to devalue our elderly,
yeah.
folks, to give them that chance for their voice to be powerful and for their lesson, to share their lessons.
And another thing is to see the connections. Like, um, my grandchildren carry some of who my father is just by virtue of the genetic history, right?
Yeah.
They will, as they grow up, maybe they will start to see, oh my God, I'm doing some of the same things my great grandfather did. I
Yeah.
see a link that carries across generations and that I can honor in my own life and can become important to me and how I continue to live my life. Um, and that cross generational kind of understanding and legacy is also quite a powerful and I think moving thing for people to see and to know. Right?
Yeah.
I understand myself better because I see the connection.
Absolutely. I see the things that I can't help about myself. I see
Yeah,
the kind of, family systems and values and culture that's been passed down. It just there's so many connections to be made.
right.
When would a person potentially want to bring in a death doula? Is it, upon a diagnosis? Is it at a certain age or stage?
So that's a very excellent question. And I think my answer keeps changing. Um, I would have said that in the early days of this work, that it's when somebody is at the point where they know they're dying and they're no longer getting care that's meant to cure or extend their life. Kind of at the same point when typically a person would go on hospice in our culture, our country, that means that they have a 6-month prognosis.
Hmm.
That if their illness, whatever it is, would continue at its normal way from where they are, that they wouldn't live past 6 months. Doesn't mean they have to die within 6 months, but that's just the prognosis. And I would have thought that's when um, a doula becomes important. You asked me earlier, and I never answered you. How I started this work, and so this is a connection to this piece. I think um, it started for me when I was a hospice social worker, and I had been doing the work for probably about 6 years. And I kept encountering deaths that did not seem to me to be the kind of deaths I would have expected from a hospice, patient, where, hospice is a very caring and I think loving benefit that people have. And nonetheless, I was seeing deaths that I thought were not turning out the way I would have hoped and expected. And I kept trying to think or search for how can I make it better for the patients that I'm serving? What's missing? What's not happening that
Mm.
would make this different? And just coincidentally, at that point, I was friends with a woman who was um, going for her PhD in anthropology, and she decided she was done with academia, she was done with anthropology, and she was going to become a birth doula. And when she told me she was becoming a doula, I had no idea what that was. I'd never heard the word before. I didn't know what a birth doula was. But as she told me what she was learning, taking a birth doula training, and then as she started serving women in labor, I said, oh my God, this is what we should be doing at End of Life.
Mm.
Um, why isn't that happening? And I started looking around for people who were doing end of life or death doula work. In those days, I thought of it only as end of life doula, and there was no term death doula at that point. This is back in 2003. And so I decided I was going to try and bring that forward because no, I couldn't find anybody who was doing something like that. So I went to the woman who taught my friend to be a birth doula, and I said, I want to learn what birth doulas are doing directly because I want to try and translate this into end of life care. And I asked what she thought of that, and I asked other birth doulas, and they all thought it was a wonderful idea. And so I took a birth doula training
Wow.
so that I could learn what they learned and then see how to translate that into end of life. And at that hospice, which was in New York City, I created a death doula training. I created a training based upon what I learned from birth doulas and understanding some of the differences that are natural to the different ends of life. And so at that point, I started a program in that hospice. I taught people, it was all volunteer. The first class, I had 16 people, and the woman who taught me to be a birth doula, she came to my death doula
Oh,
training.
wow. Yeah.
And we became friends and have stayed friends since. Um, so at that point, I felt like it was natural when people were in hospice to have doulas. But over time, and as things have been changing in our society and with end of life care, I realized that we could start this work at any point from diagnosis onward. And in fact, I think there is tremendous benefit from starting the work of a death doula soon after a diagnosis. I understand that for most people after a diagnosis, there's a lot of inner turmoil.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things they're doing. They're running around looking at treatment options, going to different doctors, deciding what to do, um, allowing the diagnosis to kind of sink in. Um, so I understand that it may not happen so soon after a
Mm-hmm.
diagnosis, but I think any time after a diagnosis is appropriate. But now I'm also seeing other things that make me think that the work of life review, of looking at
Mm-hmm.
legacy, helping people to explore those parts of themselves um, can happen at any point in one's life.
Yeah.
I think about the class you were in and
Yeah.
others like you who have taken the class, and I know that they found tremendous benefit in their own lives to do the work we do in our experiential exercises in the class
Yes.
that bring us into facing the impermanence of life. I mean, this is a fact that we all have to acknowledge and we all have to accept.
Mm-hmm.
Life is impermanent, and we don't know when things are going to change for us. And it's not only the old people that die.
No, we never
And
know.
so, I think there's any point in a person's life when they're open to the idea that, working with a doula could be useful. And now I'm also looking at sudden deaths.
Yeah.
When people have when loved ones have experienced the sudden death of somebody, that's also a beautiful time to work with a doula, to look at the life of that person, the legacy of that person. And I think it helps dramatically with the grieving process
Yeah.
to do that kind of work. And so I think doulas, can have a role in a much wider spectrum of a person's life than I had originally thought. And so now I think that there's a lot of opportunity here that goes well beyond working with somebody in the last 2 weeks or 6 months of a
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much I want to just comment on there that you put out there. I guess the first thing is, we have these postpartum doulas. So kind of mirroring what you did originally,
Yeah.
and looking
Postmortem doulas.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So there's definitely something very rich there for folks, especially like you said, if they didn't get that time, or opportunity, or know that they could, or if the death was sudden, to do this work,
Mhm.
um, after the person has passed. And I guess I was definitely going to comment on it, and I guess I'll just do it now. Well, we'll talk about it some more, but the training, that you give, that, I really think that I took it to do some work on facing death for myself. I didn't know if I fully knew that when I signed up, but it was very clear. And I would recommend anyone to do the Death Doula, End-of-Life Doula training, if not to grab another certification and, become a Death Doula, to go through the process that you take us through, in that training. As I mentioned to you, I really feel like I even want to do it again.
Mhm.
Um, there was one very powerful thing that came out of it is I wrote a letter to my daughter. Um,
Mhm.
so you start to think about those things that, no moment is guaranteed, and we really don't know how long we'll be here. And um, to at least have written her a letter, should I pass, tonight, there's something that I've, written for her, a message from her mom.
Yeah.
Wow, like, to do that was just,
Yeah.
so important. And I think you spoke about, doing those at different points, and keeping that going. And that's something that I'd like to keep going for her.
Yeah. And, here we are recording something together, right? And how wonderful it would be to record messages for your daughter
Yeah.
so that she can hear your voice and see your face as you speak and the expressions, and how
Yeah.
powerful would that be, right?
Yeah.
Uh, you know, letters are wonderful. Video and audio adds a depth to that experience that would be amazing.
Yeah.
So
It's so true. You hear it so many times from people who just want to, hear their parents' voice one more time or see them. So you
yeah,
make such a good point.
I do a lot of grief work as well. I have from the beginning of, actually, even before I was a social worker, I was a hospice volunteer. And so I did work, visiting people who were dying, but also visiting loved ones after the person died to help them in the early part of their grief. And I just know that um, it makes a huge difference to
Mm.
be able to experience some of those things when somebody is grieving. Um, so I encourage you to do that.
Yeah. Thank you for that push. And it's so important. And yeah, like, those are the things. It's kind of wild that we don't just all do that more, knowing that. I think we know it, but I think there is a part of us sometimes that, wants to live in denial. And so, like, if I don't make the video, then there's no chance that it could happen, and
Yeah.
that's why the course is so powerful. It's really helpful and I want to live always knowing that I don't know how much time I have, because that's the person that I show up as when I live knowing that, is a better person.
Yeah. Well, and you've kind of implied that in a couple of other things you've said, and I think that's really important. That people who take the class, because of the nature of the experiential exercises we do, they are pushed, I guess, I'm not sure that's the right word, but they're pushed into facing what dying might feel like,
Mhm.
right? Um, to face the fact that they will die in a fairly short period of time. And what does that mean to them and to the people around them and to their life, right? And so those experiential exercises, I think, go well beyond what we can do independently, like sitting at home on our couch, contemplating the fact that we are impermanent and that we're going to die, doesn't carry the same kind of energy as when you're in an exercise facing another person or another couple of people who you have to speak to about your dying.
Yeah.
That makes it very intimate and very raw.
Mhm.
And I think that changes us. You know, my a lot of students have said to me that, you know, they've their lives are different because they've taken this class.
Yeah.
They live their lives in a more conscious way, with a deeper understanding of the fact that this beautiful existence, this precious life that we have, is not guaranteed forever, and
Yeah.
that changes how we live.
It's almost like through the exercise that you kind of have a near death experience.
Yeah,
You go into it. So, and we know that people that have a second chance at life, like they have that kind of, um, usually have that change of life. And I think that's
mhm,
kind of what you give us in the course.
yeah. I
Another
hope.
thing that was really powerful, that you take folks through is envisioning like how, they would want their final moments to go and who's around them and how they would want their funeral to be. And that part of the work I think is also very interesting and empowering,
Mhm,
because I imagine as we're going through the dying process, there's a loss of a lot of choices are becoming more limited.
mhm,
And then with trauma, we talk a lot about, agency helping us.
mhm.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Um, I think that's another really important part of the work, is helping people to explore what will make that last period of their dying journey as good as it can be and as meaningful to them and as helpful to them uh, as they are approaching their death. And so, looking at what is it that they would want around them, what would support them, make it easier for them to eventually let go of their body. What kind of music would they want to hear? Is there some things that they want read to them that would be meaningful, whether it's poetry, spiritual, books, mystery novels, the news, the sports results. It's all up to who the person is. Um, and we've had a lot of fun with these exercises as much as they were also meaningful. Um, some people love humor. Some people want people to, you know, offer jokes. Some people want, kids to be running around and laughing, and because that's what's been important in their lives. And so I think looking at those pieces is very helpful too. It is a reflection of who a person is and how they've lived their life, but it's also intended to help them as they're approaching their death. And not only is it about the lighting and the atmosphere and how a bed positioned in the room and where they choose to die and all of those kinds of questions, but we also do some guided imagery work that can be utilized to help a person to let go of their body more easily as they
Mm.
die. And we've done amazing guided imagery work Um, I, I, you made me think about one person in particular. Um, this is a man who had ALS. And as you may know, and the people listening to this may know, ALS kind of can rob a person of everything except their mind. So they may not be able to move their arms or their legs or swallow or do anything, but their mind is still intact. And that makes their dying journey much more complicated and um, I think more psychologically and emotionally difficult.
Yeah.
So there was this man who we worked with, and really we came into his life when he was very close to death. He was in the hospital. He was on a breathing machine. He was not capable really of breathing on his own. He had to, the breathing machine that he was on actually pushed the air into his body.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't move anything. All he could do was blink. That was the only action that he was still able to do. So this was an amazing guy because he realized that he was going to get to a place like that,
Mm-hmm.
and he taught himself Morse code.
Wow.
And so he could blink short and long and look down to end a word. And in that way, he could communicate. And we had long conversations with him just by his blinking. We put a sign on the back on the wall behind his bed with the Morse code for the letters and certain words that were common that he would use. And that's how we communicated. He made jokes. He had long conversations, um,
Wow.
but he couldn't move anything. So we asked him about guided imagery. What kind of guided imagery would be something that he would appreciate doing that would bring him into a place where he would feel um, more connected to himself, more comfortable. And he told us that he loved to hike in a particular part of the country and in the mountains, and he loved hiking there. And so he wanted us to guide him through imagery into hiking in this area in the mountains. So he described it to us, and then we used that description to do guided imagery. And the first time we did it, um, he was crying,
Mm.
and we were afraid that we had made him feel a certain sense of despair over the fact that his body had been totally lost to him. And so we asked him about it after the guided imagery session, and he said, "No, no, no, that was so beautiful. I got to walk again
Mm.
in the mountains that I love. It was beautiful. I'm crying out of joy, not out of sadness." And that was just sort of a wake up to the power of guided imagery and how it can be used in so many different ways. And that's one of the things that I emphasize too in the training is to help people utilize guided imagery in all kinds of ways for a general sense of well-being, for lessening the feeling of pain, which is often physical pain, can
Mm-hmm.
be often a part of the dying process, and how we address that with alternative means like guided imagery can lessen the need for medications that have their side effects that are maybe not things that people want.
Mm-hmm.
It can
Because
be
if you
used,
lessen the pain, sometimes you also get the being there less at the
yeah,
same time.
right. Your consciousness, your cognitive awareness can be diminished by medication, but guided imagery doesn't have that side effect.
Yeah.
Um, it can be used to help you through the final minutes or hours of your dying. It can be used for spiritual distress. It can be used in grief work which doulas also do. Sorry. Because that's another part of our work. Even after a person dies, we still continue to work with the people around them for some period of time and
Mm-hmm.
help them in the early days of their grief. And guided imagery is a wonderful tool at that point, too. So, that's just some of the things that we do about, how they want the last part of their life. And then people come up with all kinds of wonderful, things like, um, I had somebody say they wanted a confetti bomb set up right after they died.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, there's one from our group that always stood out for me with the horses. And I actually had her on because she works with horses to talk about therapy with horses. So I
yeah,
always think about that when I think about our cohort.
yeah. I've seen a beautiful video of a man who had a horse come to him as he was, at the very end when he was very close to dying, and they brought a horse in to him that was a horse that he loved, that he had a connection to,
Mm,
and it was so beautiful to see the interaction between them.
yeah.
Um, and how many people would think to bring a horse into a room with a person who's dying?
Yeah, you would because you've seen and heard it all now. Or, I mean, it is something really great about just getting out of this mindset of like, this is the way it's done. And then you get this box and like, just
Right.
really, really creating some spaciousness and freedom and choice and originality.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes we don't even know why we do things the way we do, just because like it's always been done that way. And
Yeah.
I think this adds something like, again, like, empowering to the experience.
And as we're talking about this, it makes me think about this too, that doulas often become the spark
Hmm.
to allow something to happen that would never have happened otherwise, because they are so connected to what's going on. They are so open to the possibility of expanding people's view of death and dying and finding what will be helpful to this particular person.
Yeah,
Um, and without the doulas, those things would never have happened.
definitely not. And I think I remember you kind of saying that as the doula, you're listening, and you're the one that's kind of like picking up on that,
Yeah,
and yeah, helping it to become something.
because your role as a doula is to be as present and mindful about everything that's happening in this space in a way that the people involved directly can't be, right?
Right? They're worried about.
They're
Uh,
too caught up,
they're too
right?
close to it. Yeah.
Yeah. But the doula, because they have this kind of dual role of being a participant and yet also an outsider, gives them a very particular opportunity to see things that other people wouldn't see.
As we get towards the end of our hour, just wondering if you might say a little bit about, to anyone who's maybe dealing with this, like, and how you approach resistance, folks who, yeah, are resistant against their diagnosis or what's happening or not, not accepting it, either from the person who's dying or from close family members, and what kind of role you can play in that.
Yeah. Well, it can be difficult at times, and I think you have to be very secure in yourself, and you have to understand that people's reactions, which can be focused on you just because you happen to be there, are not really a reflection on you. They're just that person's inability to embrace or accept what's going on. The reality of this individual dying, whether it's the dying person themselves or the people around them, um, they don't want this to be happening.
Yeah.
And so they can become angry and resentful, and that can get directed at anybody. I've had situations where some family members, want the doula to be there where others don't. And we have that that we have to deal with. Sometimes family want a doula present, but the dying person doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to navigate that as gently and as sensitively as possible, with an understanding that if people react to us, it's really not about us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we can't take that in as being about us. And I think if we are open and we help other people to be open with each other, that we can get through those pieces. And I've seen it happen over and over again when there's been resistance of one kind or another, that if we're um, gentle, if we move into uh, dealing with that resistance, whatever it may be about, um, in a way that helps them to feel safe
Yeah.
and to understand that we're dealing with this to be helpful to the situation, to the person who's dying, to them in this process. Eventually, those barriers break down, and they begin to see that the doula is really dedicated to helping them on this journey. And then it changes, and they become able to open themselves to it in a different way. Um, we were working with a woman who was living with her daughter. Um, and she'd been living with her daughter for just a few years when I guess the daughter recognized that her mom was not quite as good on her own. She invited her into her house, and now she was dying, and they wanted a doula. And so we started working with them. And I asked naturally about other family members, and there was a son, a brother to the daughter. And I asked about him, and she said, "Oh, no, no, he doesn't want to be involved in this. He's, when we mentioned the fact that we were going to have a doula, he got really upset, and he didn't want it. He was really dead set against it." So I said, "Well, um, what do you want me to do with this? How do you want to handle this?" And they said, "Well, don't worry about him. We'll take care of him." But I said, "I'm happy to meet with him, or when I'm here visiting and working with you and your mom, if you invite him, he'll get to see what we're doing. It'll change things for him." He never wanted to do that. He was always angry that there was a
Mm-hmm.
doula there. But then the woman who was dying had a symptom that needed to be better managed, and she was brought in through the hospice to an inpatient unit. And so we started working with her there. She rapidly declined and could not go back home. So the son he wanted to see his mom, so he couldn't avoid coming in while doulas were there. And over time, slowly, over days, he started to kind of lighten up, and he got to see what the doulas were doing and started to appreciate what they were doing and how loving they were towards his mom and his sister. And when she died, um, after he spent and his sister spent some time with their mom, I came into the room just to see how everything was going. And he came over and he gave me this huge bear hug. And he said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry that I was such an ass, excuse me, for so long. I didn't understand. You guys have done such amazing things for my mom and my sister and for me. And I'm going to become one of your biggest promoters." So it does happen. It's all about being aware and being gentle and helping people to feel safe, and then resistance kind of evaporates.
Yeah, so true. Just needs to be seen and acknowledged. And
Yeah,
we always say, roll with resistance. Don't try to fight against it. Kind of roll with it. I
yeah,
always think
yeah.
that's the best advice. Henry, is there anything that I didn't ask you that I should have asked you that you want to make clear about becoming a death doula and the process, or any words of advice for anyone who's going through death, either themselves or someone close to them?
I think your questions have been great, and it's given me an opportunity to really speak about this. Of course, I could talk about this for hours and hours. Um, but I think I would like to say that if people are listening who have some feeling that they have a calling to do this work, to be somebody who bears witness to um, the end of a person's life and to working with the people around them, follow that, answer that call, because it is the most beautiful work. Um, I've done a lot of different things in my life. I didn't become a social worker until I was in the middle of my life. And that was a wonderful decision I made. And it's beautiful work. But I think the highlight of my life has been doing doula work. It's really beautiful, deeply meaningful work, and it really changes you. Um, I think it makes you a better human being. Um, and there's nothing more rewarding than helping people to explore their lives and to live their dying in a deeply meaningful way. It's just beautiful, amazing work. It's not work that you're going to make a fortune doing,
Hmm.
right? You're not going to take care of a family of four from being a doula, but it is absolutely one of the most amazing things you can do in your life. And I think if you have that calling, you should follow it. You should take a training. Um, I'm still teaching classes. I have ones coming up. I have a class at the Menla Retreat Center in September, and I have an online class that starts in October. Um, and people can go to my website and see that. But there are other people teaching this as well. It's become a much more accepted part of the dying process in our country, and I think that's wonderful. And I hope it continues to expand and grow, and that the work can deepen. Um, so I would encourage people to really consider it as a possibility for themselves, as something you might do on the side, or when you get to a point where the work you've been doing quiets down and you're not doing that as much, or you're semi-retired, or you're young and you want to do something, in your spare time to be helpful to people. It's just beautiful work.
Yeah. And I think, even if you do it for yourself, the training is very important. I think,
Yeah.
fear of death or denial of death are two of the things which cause us to diminish our lives.
Mhm.
Um, and so facing that can just expand a person's life so much. And the training has really helped me to face my fears around death and dying, and therefore to live a more vibrant, expansive life. So I'm very grateful to you for that.
Well, thank you for saying that. And I think that what you brought out right now is also very important, because it does really impact the people who take the class. And
Yeah.
um, it's what's happened to me as well. I was a hospice social worker, but it wasn't until I became a doula that I really got to the heart of what it means to be with dying people.
Yeah. Well, what a beautiful life path you have been on and are on. I want to encourage people having done the training to take it. I did the online. I loved my cohort. We still have a little thread going. I'm also very familiar with Menla, which is beautiful if folks can get away. And it's upstate New York. It's not far from where I live. It's just a gorgeous place. I can imagine that just being in person with you in a very beautiful environment like that could be very special as well.
Yeah,
Um,
I love the in-person teaching. It just, we get to be with each other all through the day and into the night, and it's just great.
Yeah, Menla's just one of those centers that's just ready for transformation, just peaceful. The grounds are beautiful, and they have a
Yeah,
beautiful treatment center. And it's
yeah.
just a
There's a very
special.
special feeling in at Menla.
Yeah, very
I feel it
special.
every time I go there. As I arrive, it's like a deep exhale, and I feel connected to something amazing. It's
Exactly.
a very spiritual place.
Exactly. Yeah. You feel it when you enter the grounds. Tell people, Henry, what's your website? How can they find you and look more into what you're doing and
Sure.
offering?
It's just my name, so it's Henry Fersko-Weiss, all lowercase, no spaces, no dash for the hyphenated part of my name. Just Henry FERSKOWEISS.com.
Great. And we'll link that in the show notes as well. Thank you for being so generous with your time and your knowledge. I really think this conversation will help a lot of people, and you have certainly helped me. So thank you.
Well, I loved it. It was a beautiful hour with you, and I'm so glad we got to do this. And for me to spend time with you again,
Hmm.
um, I really cherish that. So thanks for
Thank
the
you.
opportunity.
Thank you.